bring your selected ones to life. It's not a coincidence that you're watching this at the moment. There are no errors in the universe. It lines up. Unquestionably, it orchestrates and discloses what you formerly sensed in your soul but were unable to describe. You were rejected and even made fun of by the same people who had doubted you. They don't just see it, they see it now. They sense it. Because truth is like gravity. After a while, you can ignore it, yet it brings everything together. And that pull is striking hard right now. The apologies, the blank looks, the abrupt changes in mood. It's all evidence. Evidence that you were never insane, lost, or simply fortunate to be ahead. Additionally, those who didn't think they were blind decided not to see. However, life has suddenly compelled them to open their eyes. What do they observe? That you were always correct. The curse of early clarity comes first. Before anyone else even knew where to look, you were able to see things plainly. Even if it wasn't what people wanted to hear, you told the truth when it was awkward and inconvenient. And they turned you away as a result. You were early, not because you were mistaken. Being ahead of your time can cause a peculiar type of agony. Ignorance isn't the only issue. Even though everyone around you laughs, brushes you off, or labels you crazy, you know deep down that what you're saying is correct. It's observing people's errors. Observing them go into storms you had foreseen, you warned them about it. It's the aggravation of knowing you're the idiot as you stand at the finish line while everyone else is still sprinting in the wrong direction. Then everything changes one day. It was because reality finally caught up with you, not because you changed. The same individuals who rolled their eyes at you now whisper to each other that perhaps you were right. Those who had doubts about you are now viewing you in a different light. Worst of all, they will never acknowledge it completely. Rather, they will pretend to have known all along, as if they simply needed more time to comprehend. However, you are aware of the reality. In actuality, they weren't prepared for your level of lucidity. They were unwilling to question their convictions, venture outside of their comfort zones, or see beyond the obvious. Their remorse is now more intense than they will ever acknowledge. Now they understand that you weren't merely expressing your thoughts. Your words were full with insight. In the end, it always proves itself, regardless of how hard people attempt to ignore it. Second, vindication has the sense of a funeral. You hoped they would see what you saw for a long time. I'm hoping they'll finally get it. And they do today. However, it feels empty rather than triumphant. Because, in reality, vindication is hardly a cause for rejoicing. It is accompanied by loss. When it comes to being too late, there's no satisfaction in seeing others realize you were correct. Hearing is not a source of joy. When the harm was already done, I ought to have paid attention. What started off as disappointment and annoyance has now grown heavier. The burden of knowing that if they had trusted you sooner, everything might have turned out differently. However, they didn't. And now it all seems pointless. The regret, the apologies, the unexpected respect. When it counted, they disregarded you. When it mattered, they had doubts about you. They want to pretend that none of that ever occurred now that the evidence is indisputable. They anticipate that everything will return to normal, as though the years of rejection are erased by their epiphany. However, it doesn't. It never does. Because you were busy discovering what it's like to stand alone while others were busy discarding you. And you were transformed by that lesson. Therefore, you no longer feel the need to prove anything when they fully see your value and your wisdom. You don't require their approval. They don't have to apologize to you. If anything, you feel sorry for them because they were denying the truth along with you. They must now live with the regret that they had access to wisdom but chose not to embrace it because they were too blind, arrogant, or obstinate. It doesn't seem like a triumph when I told you so, because they didn't believe until it was too late. It feels like a funeral for everything that could have been but never was. Thirdly, they did not want you to be correct. Because they couldn't understand, they didn't ignore you. Since acknowledging your insight would have meant shattering their own delusions, they chose to ignore you. They weren't prepared to do that, either. Because the truth is ambiguous, people do not reject it. Because it makes people face things they don't want to, they reject it. They would have been forced to reevaluate all of their beliefs if they had acknowledged that you were correct. They would have had to acknowledge the possibility that their decisions, opinions, and entire way of thinking were incorrect. And it is frightful. They decided to take the simpler route rather than deal with the unpleasantness. I'm dismissing you, making fun of you. They're trying to convince themselves that you didn't understand. But they knew in their hearts. They won't acknowledge that portion. There were times when they felt a change in their gut, when your remarks struck too close to home, and when they knew you were speaking reality rather than just ideas. However, they buried it rather than bending into it, because they would have needed to change if they had paid attention to you. They would have been forced to give up the cozy lives on which they had based their identities. Furthermore, most people would prefer to hold on to a reassuring lie than face the unpleasant reality. They have to face what they fled from now that everything you stated is coming to light. Furthermore, the regret extends beyond simply not believing you. It's about recognizing their own betrayal. Before the truth became indisputable, they had an opportunity to change, to grow, and to align themselves with it. However, they put their pride ahead of their advancement. And now, when they're stuck observing from a distance rather than joining you on your walk, they realize that their failure to listen has cost them more than just the truth. They lost their relationship with the bearer as a result. Fourth, they're apologizing to themselves, not to you. It's easy to assume that they've changed and that they've finally realized that perhaps, just possibly, they're returning to put things right when they return and acknowledge that they should have listened. In actuality, though, their apology isn't directed at you. It concerns them. They're not expressing regret because they've suddenly realized how much they've hurt you. They are apologizing because they are feeling suffocated by their own regret. They must say the words to release themselves, not to heal you, because they can't bear to dwell with the fact that their error is now staring them in the face. To leave feeling lighter, they need you to reassure them that everything is okay and that it doesn't matter anymore. But when you were the one in pain, where was that care for your feelings? When they questioned you, disregarded you, and cast doubt on you, where was their guilt? When you stood by yourself, knowing you were correct, and they stared at you as if you were insane, they made you feel like the issue. It wasn't there because, in those days, their comfort came before your suffering. And it hasn't altered now, despite their remorse. They don't want to endure uncomfortable sitting. They don't want to think about the harm they caused. All they want is to get rid of it. They will also use you as a means of escape if you allow it. Without considering your needs, they will vent their guilt onto you, hoping that your forgiveness would provide them with the closure they want. They don't want to hear this, though. Not all apologies are worthy of being accepted. It takes more than a few words to heal every wound. And they don't get to go feeling free just because they've finally realized the truth. You have to live with some regrets. And you don't have to bear that load this time. They own it. The number 5 is it. Only when it costs them something do people trust in wisdom. You already told the truth. They were prepared to listen. Without expecting anything in return, you provided them with understanding, clarity, and insight. However, they disregarded you. They dismissed what you said, scoffed at your cautions, and continued on as though they were aware that they didn't require knowledge. It was merely a viewpoint that they may accept or reject. Then life occurred. They were unable to avoid the reality that struck them. Repercussions arrived at their door. They experienced everything you attempted to shield them from. All of a sudden, your words became more than just words. They were the truth. They were survival. When they believed they didn't need the key, they threw it away. The problem with wisdom is that those who have not yet experienced cannot see it. When the cost of ignoring you is still hypothetical, people don't pay attention. However, when life begins to punish them for their ignorance, when the losses begin to mount, and when they find themselves standing in the wreckage of their own decisions, that's when they begin to look for the truth you always knew. However, the harm has already been done, and they now seek your advice, insight, and presence since they have finally realized what you were attempting to warn them about. Not because they have matured, but because they have endured hardship. They now revere what they formerly disregarded. And you've already made progress, even though they're only now realizing the truth. You're not waiting for them to catch up at the same spot. You've changed, developed, and gained knowledge. For those who are blind, that wisdom is not for them. It is for people who want to. And the hard reality. Only the hard method can teach certain people. Until people have suffered the consequences of disregarding wisdom, they will not value it. Additionally, it's frequently too late for them to get it from the person who attempted to give it to them for free by the time they fully comprehend. Sixth place, they failed the test of belief. It was never just a question of whether they would eventually believe you. When the facts are clear, the evidence is in front of them, and they are left with no other option, anyone can believe. That isn't true faith. That's merely a response to reality. It's too late. Whether they had the discernment to recognize your wisdom before life compelled them to was the true test. Whether they were able to see the truth when it was still concealed, unsettling, and something that needed to be trusted rather than proven. They also didn't succeed. They decided to be blind, not because they were already blind. You weren't using riddles when you spoke. There was no fabrication on your part. You were providing them with knowledge, direction, and insight that might have prevented what was about to happen. However, they ignored you rather than paying attention. They doubted your judgment, mocked your viewpoint, and trusted what was convenient rather than what was accurate. Because they would have had to change their way of thinking and unlearn what they believed they understood if they had believed you back then. To move forward without looking at the whole path. And they had no intention of doing so. Now, when everything you mention has happened, they wish to pretend that none of that was important, as though the fact that they finally understand is all that matters. They fail to realize, however, that time is important when it comes to belief. Certain doors don't open unless you have faith in them. Only those with the foresight to spot them early can take advantage of such possibilities. And now there's a price for that insight. Because you were changing, growing, and becoming the person they didn't believe in back then, all the while they were busy doubting you. They are no longer waited for by that person. They now had the opportunity to witness the truth before it became indisputable, but they were unsuccessful. And there are always repercussions for failure. Seventh, they were afraid of your vision because it was able to see through their delusions. Your insight wasn't just disregarded. It was feared because it threatened everything they held dear, not because it was bad. The inability to understand the truth does not cause people to reject it. They turned it down because it makes them face the lies they've lived their entire lives on. You weren't merely stating the facts. You had a mirror in your hand. They were scared because, in order to embrace your vision, they would have had to acknowledge that their perception of the world was faulty and that their beliefs, decisions, and entire way of thinking might not be as sound as they would have liked to think. This was too much for them to bear. Therefore, they disregarded you rather than taking your remarks into consideration. Because it was simpler to act as though you were mistaken than to acknowledge that they were lying to themselves, they questioned you rather than themselves. For this reason, they made fun of you, called you crazy, or implied that you were the one who didn't get it. It wasn't because they were more perceptive. It was because they had to think you were mistaken. Their whole world would have begun to fall apart if they had even briefly entertained the idea that you were correct. They weren't prepared for that, either. They weren't prepared to abandon the reassuring delusion that allowed them to remain precisely as they were, devoid of accountability, change, or introspection. However, those delusions are now dissolving, not because they consciously choose to recognize the truth, but rather because it has come to them. And now they find themselves standing in the ruins of their previous beliefs, understanding that the only thing that could have saved them was the clarity you held, which is exactly what they feared. Now, however, something is different. Your vision was never for those who wouldn't open their eyes. Therefore, you don't need them to see it anymore. Eighth, they didn't simply have doubts about you. They made fun of you. They didn't simply disregard you. The joke was made up for you. They made sure you knew exactly where you stood on the outside, rolled their eyes, and murmured behind your back. Your remarks weren't just disregarded. They were made fun of. Not only was your insight questioned, they made fun of it. They made sure you felt that way because they thought you were foolish and naive. Their rejection of what you were saying was insufficient. They had to use you as an example. Your wisdom had to be transformed into something stupid, something ludicrous, something they could easily destroy. Because they didn't have to take you seriously as long as they could make fun of you. As long as they could make a joke out of your truth. They didn't have to think about the fact that they might not have understood. The laughter has since stopped. They are now hearing the identical words that they previously disregarded. However, since they now understand, they struck in a different way this time. They are unable to laugh away the reality that they formerly denied now that it is directly in front of them. What they now regret and wish they had listened to are the same things they mocked. It's intolerable because it goes beyond simply being incorrect. It's about realizing how foolish they were. They believed they were more intelligent. They believed that they had everything worked out. However, life has humbled them in unexpected ways. And now they're looking at you with shame rather than laughter. Not only did they disregard the truth, but they also treated the bearer of that truth with contempt. Worst of all, they are unable to undo it. The mistrust, the words, the laughter. Everything is in the past, where you were abandoned. But you, without them, you've already made progress. You have changed since they rejected you. Number 9. They believe they may return as if nothing had occurred. As if their treatment of you had been obliterated by time. As though the years of uncertainty, the ridicule, and the way they caused you to doubt yourself were all made up for by this epiphany. They don't realize, however, that the person they rejected is no longer there. You've changed. You were toughened by the loneliness and altered by the agony. They will never really understand how the betrayal changed you. It was more than just pain when they threw you out. It changed you. Piece by piece, you had to recreate yourself. Because they don't believe. Silence, wisdom, loneliness, and the ability to validate yourself were all sources of strength for you. You evolved into something better during that process, something they will never be able to obtain again. They want to get back in now. They now recognize your value, your insight, and your knowledge. However, there is no longer the version of you that they disregarded, the one that would have embraced their return. The fire they contributed to destroyed that individual. What's left is someone who doesn't have room for those who just believe when it's convenient, doesn't need their affirmation, and doesn't need their praise. They truly regret it. However, nothing changes as a result. You are not being mourned by them. They are lamenting their loss. They're attempting to get back in touch with a ghostly version of you that no longer resides here. In actuality, though, their absence was advantageous. Because you might never have truly embraced your power if they hadn't questioned you or rejected you. So let them feel bad. Allow them to mourn. Make them wish they had previously recognized you for who you truly are. They never respected the old you, but life made them do it, so never let them believe they deserve the new you. Certain losses are irreversible, and certain doors that have been closed will never reopen. 10th place. There are regrets that cannot be forgiven. Some things you simply never recover from. Some dismissals, some betrayals. Some rejections are so profound that they cannot be reversed by remorse. Even when they can now see the truth, their actions while blind remain unchanged. Furthermore, it does not imply that they are deserving of another opportunity. They weren't simply incorrect. They were unkind. You felt worthless because of them. They doubted your merit, intelligence, and sanity. As they laughed, questioned, and continued as if you didn't exist, they forced you to stand by yourself in the cold. And now you've been validated by reality. They anticipate returning. They anticipate that you would just repair the harm as if it never occurred. No, because the truth is here. There are regrets that cannot be forgiven. Not everyone is worthy of another shot. It's because certain wounds don't just heal, not because you're resentful or clinging to the past. They transform you. They leave scars that never go away. reminders of the price you paid to be disregarded, ridiculed, and questioned. And that cannot be undone by apology. Repentance is not regret. They haven't earned their way back in just because they feel horrible right now. An apology won't make up for the pain they caused you. That version of you that would have been so willing to forgive, to welcome them back, to act as if it never happened is no longer there. So they are unable to contact the person you are now. Furthermore, they never get to meet the person that emerged from their doubt's ashes. So let them feel bad. Allow them to bear the consequences of their errors, but do not allow them to return to a place they never appreciated when it was important. Some bridges are designed to remain in flames. Some people are destined to live with the knowledge that they lost you forever, and some doors are designed to remain locked. Number 11. No proof was ever necessary for the actual ones. You weren't questioned by everyone. The majority laughed, brushed you off, or ignored you, but not everyone required evidence to realize your wisdom. Some people, perhaps only one or two, had faith in you without waiting for the world to confirm it. And those folks? Since genuine people trust you without waiting for proof, they are the only ones who matter right now. It doesn't take the end of the world for them to see your wisdom. Even when it wasn't immediately apparent or when it would have been simpler to follow the herd and ignore you, they saw something in you right away. Before life proved you correct, they had the judgment, intuition, and understanding to see your truth. That's what separates the people who are currently frantically trying to re-enter your life from those who actually belong. Those who departed, those who chuckled, those who needed to witness the repercussions before they could recognize your insight. Your people were never them. They were always the ones who took the simplest route. And they did when it was simpler to doubt you. They made fun of you when it was more convenient. They want to pretend that none of that ever happened now that it's simpler for them to believe you. The actual ones, though, when things weren't easy, they were there for you. They felt that you never had to prove yourself, even when it wasn't popular. And at this point, those are the only individuals worth retaining. Allow those who regret not seeing it sooner to sit with their regrets. Allow them to bear the consequences of failing the test. However, it would be a waste of time to attempt to mend something that was never solid in the first place. The people who have earned a spot in your future deserve your energy. Thus, they are the ones who never needed proof. 12. They are still uneasy about your knowledge. Don't consider their sadness for their doubts about you as genuine comprehension. Now they see you were correct. However, that does not imply that they are prepared to accept the breadth of your knowledge. Yes, they will pay attention, but only to the bits that don't make them uncomfortable. Only to the realities they can accept without having to rethink their entire perspective. Because remorse hasn't necessarily opened their brains, but it has opened their ears. Comfort was never intended for your intellect. It pushes, agitates, and compels growth, which is unpleasant. The majority of people do not want the complete truth. They don't need to change. They simply want enough to feel like they're learning. They will acknowledge that you were exactly where they once disregarded you, and they will nod now where they once made fun of you. You'll see it again, though, when you begin to speak about the next level of truth, the one that calls for profound change. They still feel threatened by your wisdom, which is why they are still hesitant, uneasy, and afraid. It's still too much to ask. It continues to reveal the flaws in their beliefs, delusions, and way of thinking. They will also resist, as previously. This time, perhaps, there will be selective hearing rather than outright rejection or blatant mockery. The realities that are simple and easily incorporated into their existing lives will be accepted by them. However, they will still be afraid of the deeper levels, the ones that demand that they entirely abandon their old ways of thinking. They regret not genuinely appreciating your wisdom because of this. It's about wishing they hadn't had to deal with the fallout from disregarding it. They're still not prepared for the whole truth, though. They might never be, too. Because true insight doesn't only seek for attention. It requires them to alter. And regardless of how much they say they believe you, the majority of people will always oppose it. They will now attempt to change the past, at number 13. They will attempt to alter history, so pay close attention. They will distort, rearrange, and wash it down till it is more bearable for them because they cannot face the reality of what they did. They won't acknowledge that they completely disregarded you. They refuse to acknowledge how they questioned, made fun of, or turned you away. Rather, they will reframe their betrayal as something more palatable and forgivable. I always felt you were right, they will say. They didn't. They wouldn't have made fun of you, cast doubt on you, or abandoned you if they had. They are merely trying to avoid appearing foolish by claiming to have had that feeling. They'll claim that I only needed more time to comprehend now that the reality is indisputable. In actuality, though, they weren't attempting to comprehend. They weren't paying attention. They were closed. They refused to look past their own conceit. Not because you needed more time. Not wanting to trust you was the issue. Because they would have had to question themselves in order to believe you back then. They weren't prepared to do that, either. Some would even attempt to deceive you into believing they never opposed you. I had no doubts about you. All I was doing was waiting for events to unfold. Falsehoods. Do you recall their gaze on you? You recall the ancillary remarks. The manner in which they disregarded you and gave you the impression that you were the one who didn't comprehend. Before you could believe in yourself, you had to stop depending on them to believe in you. And they will never completely comprehend that portion. This moment feels important to them. The point at which they acknowledge that you were correct. They believe it bridges the divide and has meaning. That in some way, it compensates for all the times they questioned you. But it's simply noise to you. Too late, too little. Because you were busy becoming someone who doesn't require their approval at all, while they were busy disregarding your wisdom. They must now bear the burden of their remorse. You are no longer involved in it. The past is not fixed by it. It doesn't change how they handled you. It doesn't give them access to who you've grown into. Because the person standing in their place has already moved on, and that version of you, the one who waited for them to see the truth and sought their approval, is no longer there. They can already see it now. Now they regret it. They regret not believing you when it counted. However, none of that alters the fact that they have already been rejected and ridiculed. You were shaped by everything, but not in the manner they believe. You weren't broken by it. You weren't weaker because of it. It compelled you to assume your authority without their consent, to hone your intellect without their approval, to develop into a person who doesn't wait for other people to catch up. The one they questioned. That individual is no longer with us. They will never be able to regain the person they regret losing. And that's what their defeat really means. They were mistaken, but that is not all. It's that they had to pay for their realization. A price they cannot reverse. They'll make an effort to soften their treachery. They'll attempt to change history. They will attempt to persuade themselves that they have always recognized your potential. However, you do recall, in actuality, their remorse is a personal weight. It is not necessary for you to carry it for them. Proof was never required by those who cared. The real ones never went away, as well as those who questioned you. Allow them to sit with it. Make them regret not seeing it sooner. Before the world proved you correct, let them live with the fact that they had the opportunity to stand by your side. They also didn't succeed. And now? You now proceed without them. Stronger, smarter, and totally unconcerned by those who believe only when it suits them. Because those who were unable to see your value in the past don't deserve to be in your life anymore. And they will always have to live with that loss. Don't keep this message to yourself if it resonated with you and you felt every word. Make it known. If you understand what it's like to be discarded, undervalued, or doubted, hit the like button. You're not alone, I assure you. So share your story in the comments section below. Most essential, since this is only the beginning, subscribe and enable notifications. We're creating a place for people who look past appearances, think outside the box, and don't require approval to see their value. And spread the word if you know someone who should hear this. Allow them to sense it. Allow them to sit with it. Since not all messages are intended to be heard. Their purpose is to awaken people.